Welcome everybody to the best way to start your week, Monster Monday. For this wonderful wintry week, I have made a mechanical monster to menace your mates with in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. That goes by the name of, get ready, I gotta over-enunciate this, the Rakewrist. To be completely honest, this isn't one of my creatures, and I do mean that in a number of ways. The Rakewrist is a creature made for the world of Horizon Zero Dawn by Cameron McLoud, a dinosaur, monster, and machine enthusiast. Art for the Technoterror is provided by Spooky Activity, and was commissioned by Cam, who makes these creatures for D&D 5e. He's been wanting to see them in PF2e, so we're collaborating here to bring you some new monsters, and with more to come in the future. For now, this is me working in a bit of reverse, building a Pathfinder 2nd Edition monster off of a D&D 5e stat block. The Rakewrist is inspired most obviously by the Therizinosaurus, but also draws upon the Glavenus and Ceregios from Monster Hunter. While the Rakewrist was originally built at CR14, Cam said that he wanted to tone it down a touch, and with it coming to PF2e, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to bring it down to a level 13. In addition, it's going to be using the construct, robot, and tech traits, since this is after all a machine made in the image of a beast. And it actually does follow that with a rudimentary sort of intelligence, which we'll see as we get into the numbers. The Rakewrist is envisioned as a swift and nimble foe who dashes into combat. This lends to its use of an extreme dexterity, an agility that might come as a surprise given its size. This size does feed into its high strength, letting it carve through enemies and obstacles with ease. While its original role has been lost to the annals of time, the Rakewrist has been repurposed for combat situations, leading to a moderate constitution and then a low wisdom. These guys aren't meant as hunters or anything of the sort. They leave all that to the spotters. Their job is to just go in there and fuck shit up, which is the reason behind them using an animalistic intellect. Case in point, they only use a moderate perception, but it is Cam's intent that all critters of his machine catalog will have dark vision, so it does have that going for it. Given its dexterity, it also has a high acrobatics, but uses a high athletics as well, since jumping and pouncing upon prey is supposed to be an important aspect of this creature. This also leads into its astounding leap feature, which is effectively just quick jump for our cruel carving construct, and is based on abilities that Cam assigned it. While the Rakewrist is a big target, we have to keep in mind that it is highly nimble as well. I mention this because it uses a high armor class, and while much of that can be attributed to its startling speed, some of it will come from the armor affixed to its form. Going along with this high armor class is an HP value in between moderate and high, though a little bit closer to the latter. Now, the Rakewrist does have the full suite of construct immunities, and even has a moderate resistance to electricity. But it does have two elemental weaknesses to balance this out, equipped with a weakness to both acid and fire damage. While it has a high reflex save, both of its fortitude and will saves are low. This can make it susceptible to maneuvers such as grapple and shove, and cutting off its maneuverability is a great way to limit its capabilities. Now, I could take a moment here to talk about the creature's components, but I think we should save that for a discussion on its abilities. And before we can talk about any of them, we need to take a look at the offensive capabilities of our mangling machine mauler. I often find myself inclined to use the same attack bonus for strikes on a creature, but I did manage to switch it up this time. Leading the pack here is the Rakewrist's claws, which have a high attack bonus, drawing from the notably accentuated claws of the Therizinosaurus. There's some reach based on the size of the Rakewrist, but much more important are its finesse, fatal, and raising traits, the last of which is based on its ability to cut through objects in 5th edition. Additionally, its claws have a crit range of 18 to 20 in 5e, which in turn inspired the fatal trait. With all these traits considered, it uses moderate damage, though gets towards extreme when it manages to land a crit. Its peak only has a moderate attack bonus, and uses the finesse and reach traits, which admittedly are both kind of standard, but it does dish out high damage. If you can only squeeze one strike into a round, this is probably the one to go for. That leaves us with its tail, which Cam said was a bit inspired by the Maquahitl. With this weapon recently being added in War of Immortals, that led me to using the tearing trait alongside the backswing, finesse, and reach traits. It has a moderate attack bonus and moderate damage, but does come with improved knockdown. It lacks the fatal trait of the claws, so this helps balance it out a little bit with that strike while also taking advantage of its high athletics. With all of that covered, we can now start looking at the juiciest parts of the monster, its abilities. We have a passive effect for the Rakewrist in the form of its Destructive Edge, which allows it to ignore some hardness, and is again based on the effect from its original design to deal extra damage to objects. It's just a nice, simple little thing. From its shortest ability, we can then look at its largest ability, Bounding Slash. Despite having a bit more packed into it, this is still fairly simple, and is based largely on the Bullet's Leaping Charge. However, the Bullet requires 2 actions to pull off a similar maneuver. Given the Rakewrist's Astounding Leap, I reduced this to a single action, but then added the Flourish trait, as it does potentially allow the Rakewrist to make 2 claw strikes as part of this action. It's a great way for it to get into the fight, bounding into the midst of enemies and just savagely slashing at them. However, if it wants to soften up a group of targets first, it can use its Quill Spray, which might have the most obvious Regios DNA in its design. This is a pretty straightforward area effect that deals limited use area damage with a high DC before going on a short little cooldown as the shards regenerate and regrow. Now, where that ability is based on the Regios, its Sharpened Blades is based on the Glavenus, and actually draws specifically from my design of the Glavenus that I built for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I tuned it up a little bit and made this a single action that the Rakewrist can use to effectively give its claws the Keen Rune until the end of its turn, letting it crit on a 19 as long as it's still a hit. Which, given the high attack bonus of its claws, is probably a pretty good chance, and that might actually make this ability a little superfluous. I think if I were to make any change here, I might drop the Fatal to a D10, and then add that this action increases the Fatal die to a D12 in addition to its other effects. But that's just a suggestion, a thought, and feel free to let me know yours on the matter. Rounding out our active abilities is Sickle Stride, which gives an honestly nice cycle of abilities. A Rakewrist could start a fight with Quill Spray while the group is still bunched up, before it leaps into them with Bounding Slash. Then, after the heroes have reacted to this mecha monster in their midst and likely scattered, it can chase them down with this Sickle Stride, extending its claws and dashing about enemies. This behaves a little bit like Trample or the Nightmare's Flaming Gallop, but the Rakewrist actually has to roll strikes to hit with this. This does mean that it could do a Sharpened Blades before charging through its foes to hopefully bisect its enemies. I want to finish off our look at the Rakewrist's abilities with one that is actually a vulnerability, and goes by the name Components. This was an important part of the 5e creature, so I wanted to bring it into my version of it, largely because I knew that I'd be using an ability like this in the future, and I might even bring this into some of the Monster Hunter creatures I build going forward. The basics of this are inspired by the likes of the Hydra and its targetable heads, and in this case, allows the heroes to target distinct parts of the creature at an extreme AC. Most components have hit points that will take 2 to 3 hits to finish off, because they leave the Rakewrist full on crippled. For example, taking out the Rakewrist's power cell leaves it slowed 1, greatly restricting its actions. Targeting its more external components can cripple its actions or features, as seen with its beak, scythe claws, or tail blade. Finally, it is equipped with a Glow Blast container that can be detonated and deal some massive damage to the Rakewrist. Given that this limited use area damage explosion with a high DC comes from within the creature itself, and has an innate weakness to the fire damage on top of that, making this a highly potent component to puncture. The Rakewrist is mechanically complex from a flavor standpoint, but pretty simple when you get down to it. This Cybersaurian slices and slashes with supreme speed, severing suspects from substance with a swiftness that is certainly sinister. This was a fun monster to put together, and honestly, now that I've developed the component system, I might try bringing this into Monster Hunter creatures that I build. I will certainly be using it for future Horizon Zero Dawn creatures I build, as I work more with Cam. As for this one, the Rakewrist is a solid single creature encounter that is able to maneuver around the battlefield while causing chaos. But it may also work alongside other machines like it, or people that have figured out how to manipulate its systems. With that said, let me know what you think of this creature and what others you'd like to see down in a comment. You can find some sheets for the monster, including a D&D 5e version done by Cameron, over on the blog, which is linked below alongside the Monster Monday Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have yourself a merry little Monday and a happy holiday to follow.